screen. All right, you happy?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, we're running.
Yeah. So, how did you first become involved in this project? Starting with.
Yeah, well, I came across the Tucker Course novel off the internet, and when I found out about it, like I ran to the independent bookstore in Los Angeles where I live to pick it up before they closed. It was like an hour before they closed, and got my hands on it, and just right there at the bookstore when I started peeking through it, I was just like, oh my god, it lives up to that simple sort of logline, punk Muslim. It's not a caricature of either. It's truly a world of punk Islam, and from there, read it in a few sittings, and it took me a while to think about making it into a film, like or getting the courage to make this kind of story into a film. But once I actually reached out to Michael Knight and our discussions became really involved, it became something where I was just sort of compelled to do and make.
Okay. How did you how did the audition process go? I mean, it must have been hard to find so many specific types of actors for this film.
Yeah, it was quite difficult. That was probably one of the scariest aspects of making this film was casting, because you really it's there's only so many minority actors that are known in the industry, and so there's this question of whether there was enough in the talent pool to that could be that could be found for the characters that are represented in this story and in this film. One of the casting directors, when we reached out to casting directors, told us that this film was uncastable, that there was no way we were going to find the talent, and she'd been in the business for a while and she knows what she's talking about. Obviously, she's not that smart and not that good at what she does, because we found an incredible cast, and the reality is we had tons and tons of auditions and a lot of talented people out there who are of the South Asian community, the Middle Eastern community that could have done the role. Thankfully, we ended up going with people we just not only were good actors, but intellectually were there where we needed them to be, and understanding where we needed them to be. And half the cast is of Muslim descent, so or comes from a Muslim background. Whether they are Muslim or now, you gotta ask them that question. But it was good that we were able to come out of that process with the cast we did. But yeah, it was a struggle, and we went about it. We did a nationwide casting call. This gentleman by the name of Ryan Glorioso out of Louisiana. We had to leave Hollywood. They didn't get it. We had to go to Louisiana, and Ryan set up basically a virtual casting sort of experience for us to sort of go from, and that was it. A few of the actors, rather, main cast members I sort of found or knew of. Noreen, I had known and really liked her work a lot, and I offered her the role of Rabia. Dominic, I saw in a play, and there's just a few of the folks that I sort of luckily came across in the process of making this film.
I see. How did you come up with the aesthetic for the film? How did you figure that one out? I mean, it's pretty bleak and pretty, I would say punk.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yes, the colors desaturated heavily. It's as far as the framing of the film, it's very simple. We're not trying to do anything crazy. There's a few scenes of chaos, but for the most part, we were limited to the locations we were filming in, and it was a small, tight punk house, and you get that sort of crammed-in feeling sometimes when you watch the film. And we watched a lot of punk films. I read a lot of punk materials. I listened to a lot of music, and all of that went into the final film. And for me, a film that I really liked a lot was Suburbia, and I tried to the original one. Are you familiar with that film? Early 80s film.
It sounds familiar, but
Okay.
I don't think I've seen
So yeah, if you Google it, you'll find out about it. And that was one of my favorite sort of in the process of researching films, and it was very, very, very raw and very rough around the edges. Sort of felt like it was duct taped together, and I wanted to go for that with this film, and sometimes especially critics, sometimes they scratch their head at that because it's sometimes too rough, and they find that aesthetic to the point of too unearthly, too chaotic, and it doesn't make sense to them. But that was something for me that I wanted to particularly go for better or for worse. And there's some people who really appreciate that, and there's some people who don't. But that's punk rock for you in general. So, we were very happy with the results of what we aimed to do.
Okay, so what was the biggest challenge apart from the casting? It's your first long feature. It's an
Yeah.
independent film. It's about, Muslims in
Mhm.
America and punks.
Sure. Well, as a director, there's so many things going on with this film. As far as the things that we do in the film that are considered controversial. Trust me. I would scratch my head and stress out and sweat about, do we really want to do this on camera? Should we really be doing this? Is this the right thing to do? Is this appropriate or whatever? So you have that going on, and alongside of that, you have the first-time filmmaker, first-time director, who's pretending like he knows what he's doing, and he's pretending like that he's not exhausted and tired and just stressed out about everything. It's one of those things where you just have to experience it and go through it to move on to the next thing. But yes, it was insane, and in the beginning it was very scary because you have all these people coming up to you for trying to, as a director, asking you questions, and you have to, as it went along, I figured it out, or within the context of that film, I figured things out quite well. But in the beginning, I didn't know what I was doing, and that's the honest truth. And you sort of have to just put one foot forward at a time until you find yourself walking and then running, and that was definitely the case with this film.
So what did your family, close and extended,
Mm-hmm.
say when they saw it the first time?
I think my parents saw a rough cut first, so they were just like, rough cuts you never really want to show people, but I wanted to show them right away, and they were just like, the rough cut was rough, let's just put it that way. We had a lot of help along the way to make this film what it is, and one of them, we can get into it later, but the Sundance Institute at one point gave us advisement on the film. But anyway, they wanted certain things out of the film. They didn't like certain things. My mom in particular, there's a scene that really bothers her, and there's a scene when Robbie is in her room talking to Yusuf about the Quran, and Robbie has crossed out a verse of the Quran, and they're having this conversation. Yusuf saying you can't do that, and her trying to explain why she did do that. And it's one of those controversial elements of the film, and it was just long and battled discussions with my mother and why we were going to do that, and at one point, I went tonight, I was like, Mike, this is the only thing this is my mother, she doesn't want me to do this, and I'm considering not showing this. It's going to happen, they're going to talk about it, but I don't want to actually show the verse crossed out. And then Mike, refused, and there was a scholar involved, Laurie Silvers, who helped us, who does a lot of work with Islam and gender, and ultimately, as an artist, I had to sort of sacrifice my request to my mother and really do what I really believed in and what I felt was best for the film. So we ended up keeping it, but yes, that just goes to show how personal this film was and the kind of decisions I had to deal with, and again, not only did my mom raise me and all that stuff, but she actually cooked for everybody on set every night. She sacrificed a lot for a month to help us make this film, whether she wants to admit it or not. And so it was interesting. All of these things sort of went into the experience of making this film.
Do you feel like...
Sorry.
Throw some mics on? So do you feel like it has upset or offended anyone? I'm sure you've done this very carefully. But
we haven't gotten people. We have people that just sort of write it off and say this is stupid, and I think that's where we're getting more so than people getting angry and pissed off and threatening or anything like that. And I think that just goes to show that the Islamic community is not what people perceive it to be. That if you sort of if you challenge anything about it, people will flip out and riot or whatever. The reality is, in most of those instances, what I've come to find is the media is heavily involved with it. the people who are doing it are in certain places to seek attention, or they're in institutions or something that, what am I trying to say? In those instances, there is sort of a malicious intent to attack, and it's coming from a place more beyond. It's not coming from a constructive place. So, our film, I really felt like people did see it as that, even though they might not agree with most of it or any of it. They did see our sincerity in it, and I think that's why people do sort of let us do our thing and not really bother us too much, because it has an intention of respect, although on the surface it does not seem like that at all.
So, final question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have time.
Yeah.
Who do you think these kids' God was in the end, Allah or punk music? How do you see it?
You know, that's a tough question. You know, I think, this film ultimately tries not to answer those kind of questions. It's more allowing people to walk away with their own reflections. I think different characters relate to that answer differently, have a different answer for that question, rather. I think ultimately, though, whether it's God or something else, whatever you want to call it, I think the whole point of this film is, you're, as an individual, you're a part of something bigger than you. You're not the one always running the show, and whether that's your perception of God or as you're an atheist, that's just your common understanding of humanity. It's to remind people of that, and I think the film, conveys that. And if you take that away, I think that's a good thing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mostly the 70s.
Yeah. Cameras.
Led Zeppelin's my favorite.
Spade.
I'm not on that street. I'm
Okay.
more of the 80s.
Oh, you're more the 80s.
2 years.
Yeah.
Cool. So, how did you first come to find out about this character, and how did you end up playing it?
I was doing a stage play in LA. Iad knew one of the actors who was in the play with me, came to see her, saw the play, and afterwards approached me. We talked for a little bit, told me very briefly, and he didn't want to give me too much. I think he wanted me to read for myself and then kind of go from there. So he passed on the screenplay. At first I started reading the screenplay, and literally like 10, 15 pages in, I was like, whoa, what is this? And I literally threw it across the room and walked around for a little bit, and then came back to it. And then it kept pulling me. It kept drawing me in and drawing me in and drawing me in. And, it was interesting. When I read it, there was a part of me that was drawn to it, and there was a part of me that was kind of like all the fears and all the different obligations that I had started to kind of like come to the surface. And I was like, I couldn't do something like this because of, my cultural background, my national background, which Islam falls into all of this. And, I have kind of an obligation to these, my parents, to the society and this and that. And it was just very, very, I want to say it was very narrow-minded in a sense, because it didn't allow this thing to seep in. And I wasn't able to see like what it really was, which was a thing of beauty. And it was only until after I had talked to Iad and I went through and I read the novel, and then Iad passed me on to the author of the book, Mike, and I started, sat down and talked for like 2-3 hours on the phone, that I realized, wait, this is actually, it's got a very beautiful message. It's got a very positive flow to it. It's its own thing, and you just got to allow it to be its own thing. And that's what the whole kind of the story started to, the story is, and these different characters, they're defining, Islam or punk rock or whatever it may be. Any medium at the end of the day is defined for you. And this is what I started to realize what it was. And it was funny because I called my parents and I was like, there's a film and it does this, this, and that. And they were like, oh, I don't know if that would be good for you to do. You wouldn't be able to go back to Iran and then blah, da, 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 da. And everything that they had told me that I wanted to hear so it would give me a reason not to do it, basically, after all the conversations I had with these guys and an epiphany struck in my head and I realized, wait a minute, that is the reason why I should do it. So then, I jumped on and I was very happy to jump on, and the rest I just kind of let go. And
So you were set on this character from the very beginning. You had decided it at the end.
after I had read the screenplay and read the novel, I read the screenplay and I called Iyad and I said, I really like Jahangir. And he was like, that's the one I want you to read for. And I said, okay, let's give it a shot. But I still had reservations. And it was after he said, talk to Mike. And finally I talked to Mike and we talked for 2-3 hours, and Mike kind of went to his background, went to, how it all came to be what it is. And I was drawn. And I said, okay, let's do it. And,
So how did you prepare for it?
well, I was fortunate because I had a novel, you know what I mean, that had so much information, that gave so much. All the nuances of this character were in this novel. And then, being able to, the punk aspect of this character with the mohawk and the pants and the chains and the skateboarding, and it was just this very free individual, fearless, very loving, very compassionate, a lot of humility to who he is. And even in the book, it even says, Yusuf said that, no matter who he thought he was, Allah would always keep him sincere and humble. And, that stuck with me. So I knew if I were to gauge it down that avenue and enhance those certain traits, that I would be okay. And the rest was just basically physicality, playing around, I had a good month to, play with the dialogue, to play with his swagger, the way he would talk, the way he would act, and I didn't feel like he was too far from who I was as far as having a good time and being fun and being free, and so I just took to those and I let that guide me.
So is that hair real, or is the hair fake?
The hair was real. The hair was real. We have to give a lot of credit to Faith. Faith Gobedias. What was her name? Iyad? Faith.
Yeah.
Gobedias. Yeah. And she jumped on. So I got there one day, and the next day we were bleaching my hair and adding all this color and everything to it. But we made it work, and I didn't wash it. I slept like that, woke up like that.
What about that jacket? How was it like putting it on?
It was incredible. It was incredible. It was the jacket has a lot of weight. It's a heavy jacket, so it required a certain posture. You had to break through. You could I could have, because the jacket was a little bit bigger than I was. I could have become hidden under that jacket in some ways. You know what I mean? But there was I used the jacket. The jacket became its own character for me, as much as the hair did and the outfit did. It was its own thing. So I just played with it. I used the weight. I'd let it, if I felt it drag me on one side, I'd let it, I'd really let it do its thing.
So
Yeah.
what
I don't
did
know
your
if
parents say when they film?
They fell in love with it. They fell in love with the film. My father told me in 50 years of watching films, I've never seen anything like this. I'm happy that you did something like this. You're showing, you're all showing that a person, it doesn't matter if it's Islam or punk rock or Christianity or religion or whatever form, you know, people try to find something to identify with. And even if it's for a brief moment of time, that sense of identity gives them a meaningful purpose and a sense of being able to maybe move past that fear of whatever they're experiencing that is filling them with a sense of guilt or doubt or whatever it may be. So it was like this was a moment of time for these characters, but also on a broader scale for people who watch this film, people who have been affected by this film, to say, you know, my interpretation is my interpretation. You know, at least this is a good starting point for me where I can be comfortable with where I'm at. From here, then I can move forward and say, okay, I'll work with this and I'll do this and I'll grow and do the study here and study there. And the way the film even, and you saw, you see the, so even at the end, the way they finished the end was, which I thought was fantastic, it left Yusuf in a way that it wasn't like, oh, Taco Course is it. We're done, it's finished, this is what Islam and punk rock and all this, it wasn't like that. For him, it was a moment of time where he was able to gain an understanding, have a refreshed look at what his idea of Islam was now, what it is, and to build from there. Instead of it's this way and it has to be this way and I'm living somebody else's idea of it, because it's simply that and it belongs to the individual to decide.
How about the punk aspect, the punk music? How much did you do in terms of that? Did you listen to a lot? Did you try to jam?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed, rock, classic rock, alternative. Hip hop was a big part of me growing up, and in some ways, a lot of that music was always in some way rebellious, but always wanted its own place. Whether it was the rappers or the rockers, whatever it may have been, it was always those individuals creating their own moment in time for themselves, trying to define who they are for themselves within a world that is trying to shape them, trying to make them something that they may not, if they do follow down the road, there may be remorse or guilt. So it's always like a sense of rebellion to come to a place of understanding. And I felt the same thing with the punk rock music, and when I talked to Mike, he said, Tim Armstrong from Rancid, I really kind of based Jahangir off of this guy. So I looked at a lot of his stuff, and he passed me on a lot of YouTube videos, and I got into Rancid, I got into NoFX, Misfits, and Ramones, and I just started to look into that whole genre. That some of the music I had heard before, a lot of it I hadn't. But really, it was no different from really what I had felt growing up listening to hip hop, let's say, or other different music that I had listened to. So it was it kind of fit in, but it was its own thing, and I was able to have fun with it, and that was really the punk aspect was a lot of fun.
It's about 20. Just so you know, it's about 25 minutes. Sure.
Oh, okay. Last question.
Sure.
In the end, who is the God for these kids in that house? Is it the music or is it Allah?
I don't think you could really break it down down to those two choices. I mean, who knows what it could have been. I mean, one complements the other. One drives the other, and vice versa for these individuals to kind of. It was a moment of time. It's like in the late 60s during the Vietnam era, people would listen to a lot of music that kind of, with a lot of smoking dope and drugs that took them to a different world that would be an escape. And, those same people may enjoy that music and those times, but that's not where they are now. You know what I mean? And for them, it seemed like it was a moment in their world, a moment of time in their world where they were able to experience something that challenged them, that gave them something to look forward to, gave them a new perspective, and in the end filled them maybe with a vast unknown that now put it in their hands to go discover and define for themselves. And Taco Cores was that platform.